What if the world's most dangerous choke point could stop the global economy in a single afternoon? What if the country holding that power suddenly realized it had trapped itself instead? Before we go further, hit like, tap subscribe, and send this to one friend who actually cares how the world really works. Not the headlines, the real story underneath them. Because what you're about to hear explains something most news channels never slow down enough to show you. There's a strip of water between Iran and Oman that most people couldn't point to on a map. It's narrow. It's quiet most days. Ships pass through it like clockwork, carrying oil, gas, and cargo to almost every corner of the planet. It's called the Strait of Hormuz. And for decades, it has quietly been one of the most important pieces of geography on Earth. Here's why it matters so much. A massive share of the world's oil moves through this one narrow gap, not through a wide ocean, not through multiple safe routes, through one thin corridor squeezed between two coastlines. If that corridor ever shuts down, even for a few days, the effects don't stay local. They spread across continents. Oil prices spike. Shipping insurance becomes insanely expensive. Airlines raise ticket prices. Factories slow production. And somewhere far away, a person filling up their car has no idea that the reason gas suddenly costs more is a tense moment happening on the other side of the world in water they'll never see. That's the kind of power a choke point holds. And for years, Iran understood that power better than almost anyone. Iran never had the biggest navy in the world. It never had the newest aircraft carriers, the longest-range missiles, or a fleet that could challenge the United States ship for ship. On paper, in a straight fight, it would lose badly. But Iran didn't need to win a straight fight. It only needed one thing: to make the world believe that using this water safely was no longer guaranteed. That single idea became the foundation of its entire strategy. Think about how simple and how effective that idea really is. You don't need to sink a fleet to scare a fleet. You don't need to control an ocean to make people afraid to cross it. You just need enough uncertainty, enough risk, and enough unpredictability that captains, shipping companies, and insurers start asking themselves one dangerous question: is it worth the risk to sail through here today? So, Iran built a strategy shaped entirely around that question. Fast attack boats that could swarm a target from multiple directions. Coastal missile batteries hidden along the shoreline. Sea mines that could be planted quietly and detonated without warning. Drones that could strike from unexpected angles. Hidden tunnels and bunkers to protect launch sites from being wiped out in a first strike. None of these things were designed to defeat the US Navy in open battle. They were designed to make every ship captain hesitate before entering the strait. And that hesitation is worth more than most people realize. A massive oil tanker isn't like a warship. It can't turn quickly. It can't dodge an incoming missile. It can't outrun a drone. Its crew isn't trained for combat. They're trained to deliver cargo safely and come home. The moment that safety feels uncertain, everything downstream changes. Insurance companies raise their rates. Shipping companies reroute or delay. Oil markets react before a single shot is even fired. Fear in this story is a weapon just as real as any missile. For a long time, this strategy worked exactly the way Iran hoped. Tension would rise in the Gulf, and the whole world would feel it almost instantly. Traders in New York would watch oil prices jump. Analysts in London would issue emergency reports. Diplomats in Washington would hold late-night meetings, all triggered by activity in a stretch of water only a few dozen miles wide. That is real leverage built without ever fighting an actual war. But leverage built on fear has a hidden flaw. It only works as long as nobody calls your bluff. And eventually, someone always does. To understand what happened next, you have to picture the Gulf not as calm blue water, but as a pressure chamber. Every radar signal means something. Every drone launch is tracked. Every warning broadcast over the radio gets logged, analyzed, and remembered. In an environment like that, nothing is random. Every action becomes a message, and every message becomes a test of credibility. If Iran issues a warning and ships stay away, Iran looks powerful. If Iran threatens disruption and the world quietly adjusts around it, Iran gains more leverage for the future. But if Iran pushes too far and the United States finally responds with full force, the entire equation flips instantly. The question is no longer whether Iran can scare the world. The question becomes whether Iran can survive the consequences of forcing a superpower to prove that the sea will stay open, no matter what. And that is exactly the corner Iran eventually backed itself into. There were warning signs the whole time if you knew where to look. The first was economic. Iran liked to present the Strait of Hormuz as a card only it could play, a threat aimed entirely at its enemies. But that card cuts both ways. Iran also depends on regional stability. It depends on trade routes, on relationships with neighboring countries, and on the perception that it isn't the one destabilizing the whole region. The moment the strait becomes genuinely dangerous, Iran doesn't just hurt the countries it dislikes. It hurts oil buyers everywhere, angers trading partners it actually needs, and gives the entire international community a reason to unite against it. A weapon like this can be used sparingly. It cannot be used without cost. The second warning sign was military. There's a massive difference between harassing shipping and controlling a battle space. You can frighten a tanker crew with a swarm of small boats. You can plant mines and create panic overnight. But holding a waterway closed day after day while facing constant surveillance and the very real threat of counterstrikes is an entirely different challenge. It requires endurance. It requires the ability to absorb serious damage and keep operating anyway. And that is exactly where the mismatch with the United States becomes brutal, almost unfair. Because the US Navy was never just a collection of ships. It's an entire system built for exactly this kind of moment. Aircraft carriers project power far beyond the horizon, launching aircraft that can reach targets hundreds of miles away. Destroyers track, screen, and intercept threats before they ever get close. Submarines disappear beneath the surface, turning the invisible parts of the ocean into a constant, unspoken threat. Surveillance aircraft and satellites watch patterns form in real time. Logistics ships keep the entire machine fueled, supplied, and moving. Allied ports, shared intelligence, and regional air bases widen the picture even further. So when people imagine a clash in the Gulf as one navy against another, they're missing the real picture entirely. Iran's actual opponent was never a single fleet. It was a layered system of detection, response, and sustained force, built specifically to outlast exactly the kind of pressure Iran was trying to apply. That matters because hiding in a narrow sea is incredibly difficult. You can launch boats from the coast, but the coast can be watched around the clock. You can move at night, but heat signatures still get picked up. You can spread your forces out to avoid one big target, but spreading out also weakens coordination. You can bury weapons underground, but the roads, vehicles, and supply lines leading to those bunkers still leave traces. And once a crisis escalates far enough, every one of those traces becomes a potential target. Now, imagine sitting inside Iran's leadership at the peak of this tension. On paper, the original logic still feels sound. Raise the cost of pressuring us. Show the world that squeezing Iran comes with a global price tag. Prove to hardliners at home that we haven't backed down. That logic carries real emotional weight, especially for leadership trying to project strength to its own people. It energizes supporters. It turns a stretch of ocean into a stage for political theater. But the sea doesn't stay theater for long. Here's the part almost nobody talks about, and it might be the single most important idea in this entire story. In a crisis like this, the most powerful weapon isn't the missile, the drone, or the mine. It's the clock. The longer a disruption continues, the more pressure builds on absolutely everyone involved. Oil importers panic. Exporters lose massive amounts of revenue. Shipping schedules collapse. Insurance premiums spike overnight. Diplomats scramble to make emergency calls. Militaries reposition ships and aircraft. Intelligence agencies dig for answers. A brief disruption can be survived. A sustained closure becomes a full-blown global emergency. And that means whoever starts the crisis has to either escalate fast enough to force real concessions, or find a way to step back before the backlash becomes overwhelming and impossible to control. Washington can be slow to decide. It can be politically divided. It can send mixed messages in the early hours of a crisis. But once freedom of navigation becomes the actual issue at stake, the American response tends to move in one very predictable direction. It stops being about one tanker, one drone strike, or one seized ship. It becomes about something much bigger. Whether a regional power gets to decide who is allowed to use one of the most important sea lanes on the planet. And if the answer to that question ever appears to be yes, every ally starts doubting American guarantees. Every rival studies the opening for its own future use. Every other choke point on Earth suddenly becomes more dangerous. That's why a confrontation in these waters can spiral so quickly. It isn't because the sea is crowded. It's because the meaning behind the water is enormous. So what happens when a threat like this gets pushed too far? First, the world quietly tests whether the threat is even real. Shipping companies look for safe windows to cross. Friendly nations seek private reassurances. Rival powers measure just how serious the warnings actually are. Some ships slow down, some reroute entirely, some continue on with military escorts. The pattern itself tells every government watching whether they're dealing with empty bluster, temporary harassment, or genuine attempt to rewrite the rules of the sea. If this breakdown is helping the bigger picture finally click into place for you, do something simple. Save this video so you can come back to it later. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, and send it to somebody who actually enjoys understanding the world instead of just scrolling past it. Because we're only just reaching the part where the entire gamble starts to unravel. Next comes the coalition effect. And this is where things get even harder for the side pushing the crisis. Countries that disagree on almost everything else can usually agree on one thing. Nobody wants a single actor deciding the fate of a global shipping lane. Energy importers hate instability above almost anything else. Gulf neighbors fear the chaos spilling into their own waters. Asian economies depend heavily on steady fuel flow. European nations worry about both prices and the dangerous precedent being set. Even countries with their own tensions against Washington usually still prefer predictable trade routes over total unpredictability at a major choke point. That doesn't mean every nation rushes to take the same military stance. It means the diplomatic cover available shrinks fast as the crisis grows more disruptive. Every added threat pushes insurance rates higher. Every act of harassment pulls more countries into paying close attention. Every delay at sea creates fresh commercial losses somewhere in the world. Every escalation gives opponents a stronger justification to frame the aggressor not as a besieged nation defending itself, but as a destabilizing force threatening everyone equally. If a crisis stays framed as a simple standoff between two countries, the aggressor can still sell a story of resistance back home. But the moment that crisis becomes seen as an attack on international shipping itself, the aggressor risks facing a much wider coalition, standing almost completely alone against the rest of the world's interests. And once that shift happens, stepping back stops feeling like humiliation. It starts feeling like survival. Let's be honest about the military reality here too, without exaggeration in either direction. Iran genuinely has tools that can make these waters dangerous. Coastal missiles are real threats. Sea mines are real threats. Drone swarms are real threats. In shallow, crowded water, even a smaller force can create serious problems for a much stronger navy. Every competent military planner takes this seriously. Nobody with real experience laughs off a choke point lined with these kinds of weapons. But creating danger is not the same thing as winning control. Controlling a sea lane means keeping it usable for your own side while denying it to others. That requires persistence. It requires protected supply lines. It requires strong air defense. It requires the ability to replace losses and keep functioning under constant pressure. The United States, despite all its own limitations, is built for exactly this kind of long, sustained operation. Iran's strengths lie in denial and disruption close to home. That's a real and serious advantage, but it's also a real and serious limitation, because disruption alone can't hold a position forever. This is where staying power becomes the deciding factor. And it's where the American system becomes almost suffocating for the other side. A carrier strike group isn't dangerous only because of what it can destroy. It's dangerous because of what it represents: time. It can remain on station for weeks. It can launch strike after strike. It can defend itself while contributing to a much larger, coordinated effort. Destroyers intercept threats and maintain visible control. Submarines create constant fear beneath the surface. Patrol aircraft widen the range of detection. Slow, unglamorous, mind-clearing operations begin the tedious work of reopening blocked lanes. None of it looks cinematic, but it's exactly how control over the sea gets restored, piece by piece, day after day. There's also a political cost that rarely gets enough attention in these moments. A strategy built around fearless resistance depends entirely on maintaining that image both at home and across regional alliances. But once real costs start climbing, leadership faces a painful choice: keep escalating and risk losing genuine military assets that took years to build, or step back and somehow explain to your own supporters why the grand threat ended without the promised outcome. When your opponent is a superpower at sea, actual material losses start to look far worse than any temporary embarrassment from backing down. This is where the real lesson of the whole story starts coming into focus. When a crisis like this ends in retreat, it isn't because the weapons suddenly disappeared. It isn't because the ideology behind the threat changed overnight. It isn't because the water became magically safe. It happens because the cost curve flips. The threat that once looked like powerful leverage starts to look like self-inflicted harm. The pressure campaign meant to intimidate the world, instead starts isolating the very country that launched it. The narrow passage that once looked like a blade pointed outward starts looking like a trap closing in from every direction. And that more than any dramatic speech or bold declaration is the real truth about power at sea. Geography can help you threaten. It cannot guarantee you victory. Disruption can generate headlines. It cannot always generate outcomes. Fear can open a crisis with ease. It rarely lets you close that same crisis entirely on your own terms. Now picture the human side of all this, because it's easy to forget in a story about strategy and steel. Think about the crews on those tankers, not soldiers, just ordinary workers who signed up to move cargo, not to become the centerpiece of a global standoff. Think about families elsewhere in the world watching fuel prices creep upward on the news, with no idea that behind those numbers are real ships, real sailors, and real commanders, making split-second decisions in crowded, tense waters where one miscalculation could cost hundreds of lives and shake markets by the next morning. That's why this story matters beyond the maps and the military hardware. It's a reminder of how fragile ordinary daily life can become the moment a quiet stretch of water turns into a contest of wills between powerful nations. If you're starting to see how deep this really goes, this is exactly the moment to hit that subscribe button. Drop a like so more people who care about real analysis can find this video, and share it with someone who still thinks world events just happen randomly, because almost nothing at this level ever does. There's one more layer worth understanding here, and it might be the most important one of all. Stepping back from a crisis doesn't mean the underlying tension disappears. A country can preserve its remaining strength today while quietly searching for new leverage tomorrow. It can study exactly how its opponent responded, adjust its approach, and simply wait for a different moment to try again. That means a retreat is rarely a clean ending. It's usually closer to an intermission. The same geography remains exactly where it was. The same deep mistrust remains. The same narrow, critical choke point remains. The same need for deterrence on both sides remains. That's why treating a moment like this as a simple win or a simple loss misses the deeper truth entirely. The immediate crisis may cool down, but the underlying contest keeps running quietly beneath the surface. One side keeps looking for ways to offset the other's advantage. The stronger side keeps trying to deter future threats without getting pulled into endless, costly escalation. Neighboring countries keep balancing their own fear, dependence, and diplomacy all at once. Markets keep reacting nervously to every new spark of tension, and that narrow stretch of water remains one of the few places on Earth where a local decision can create global consequences within a matter of hours. All of this happened because strategy eventually collided with arithmetic, because a bold threat eventually collided with sheer endurance, because loud symbolism eventually collided with quiet logistics, because a force built to create sudden danger eventually ran headfirst into a system built specifically to outlast danger over time. In today's world, creating disruption has never been easier. Cheap drones, precision-guided weapons, and rapid media coverage all allow smaller regional powers to create outsized shockwaves with limited resources. But turning that initial shock into lasting strategic gain is an entirely different challenge that requires more than just courage or capability. It requires careful coalition management, real economic resilience, strict command discipline, and a clear, realistic path out of the escalation once it begins. Without that path, every dramatic move risks quietly becoming a trap the aggressor built for itself. And above everything else, this is a story about the exact moment any government realizes its boldest threat may have woken up forces far larger than it ever intended to face. Here's the image worth carrying with you long after this video ends. Somewhere in those tense, crowded waters, underneath all the speeches and the flashing headlines, there comes a specific moment when pride quietly stops sounding like strength. A moment when commanders start weighing fuel reserves, escape routes, exposure to attack, allied reactions, market panic, constant surveillance, and the terrifying possibility of one small miscalculation spiraling out of control. And in that moment, they understand something crucial. One more step forward might not earn respect. It might only bring ruin. That is the exact point where retreat stops looking like cowardice and starts looking like recognition. Recognition that geography grants real power, but never guarantees victory. Recognition that disruption can wound deeply, but rarely lets you rule afterward. Recognition that the sea eventually punishes anyone who confuses temporary leverage with lasting control.